sitting in a comfy chair or in somewhere that's nice and cozy to listen to our great webinar. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to let you know that we have simultaneous interpretation in Khmer, Lao, and Vietnamese. So please click on the globe icon in the lower part of your Zoom window and select a language. Thank you. You might need to mute the original if you're listening to translation. My name is Natalie Campbell, and I am the Regional Customary Tenure and Gender Advisor for the Mekong Region Land Governance Project. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar on the pathways to customary land and forest rights in the Mekong. This is the second webinar in the series of the state of the land in the Mekong region. This series highlights the evolving environment of land governance in this dynamic region, including Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. But the relevance goes beyond. To all of those interested in land governance globally, who we hope can take away many insights from our discussion today. Today, we'll delve into the current state of customary land rights and local communities and Indigenous people in the region, focusing on the complexities of tenure recognition from Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Today's webinar will draw on findings from research and activities conducted by the Mekong Region Land Governance Project and its partners on the recognition of customary tenure rights across the Mekong region. Just for a bit of background, MRLG is a project that collaborates with over 200 diverse partners towards improving tenure security of smallholder farmers in what we call the CLMV region, so Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Specifically focusing on two thematic areas, mainly customary tenure recognition and responsible agricultural investment. Today, we will start with a presentation that will highlight key themes from two important regional publications: the recognition and formalization of customary tenure in forest landscapes of the Mekong region, a Polanian perspective, and a co-publication with the Center for Development and Environment, CDE, State of the Land Brief, Recognition of Customary Tenure in Forest Landscapes in the Mekong region. Following the presentation, panelists will discuss customary tenure recognition in their respective countries and will be reflecting on solutions and recommendations for increasing tenure security for local communities and ethnic groups in the region. Before we go on, I would like to share a few logistical, but also logical, about the webinar. The webinar is being streamed live on multiple platforms. Please note that live tweeting is occurring for this event from the Land Portal Twitter account, and the hashtag we are using is #StateOfLandMekong. We have created a social media kit for this event, which has been shared with you in the chat. If you have questions throughout the session, and we hope you do, please post them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We, of course, will attempt to answer as many as we can during the webinar, but as you know, often there's a lot of interest and not so much time to be able to answer the questions, so we'll do our best. Today's session is also being recorded, and you will receive a link of the video afterwards. Finally, various articles, but particularly two articles with key messages, will be made available after this webinar on the Land Portal and the MRLG websites. Now, please allow me to introduce our great speakers. I'm joined today by a terrific panel to discuss customary tenure recognition, development in the fields, and importantly, solutions and pathways to increase tenure security. So I think the solutions and pathways to increase tenure security is something that we'd love you to pay attention to. We want this to be a forward-looking webinar, really thinking about pragmatically how can we address these issues and how we're moving forward together. First, we have JC, who is an interdisciplinary researcher specialized in agrarian and land tenure studies with diverse experiences in academia and in development cooperation. He's been working in Cambodia since 2002 and in the whole Mekong region since 2015. Welcome, JC. We're glad to have you. Then we have, great. Then we have Stony, who's the program manager for the promotion of Indigenous Peoples and Nature Together, Point in Myanmar, and is their focal person for customary land tenure, rights, and biodiversity conservation. His work includes documentation of customary land tenure and the development of community protocols for evidence-based advocacy for the recognition of customary land tenure rights and the sensitization of the rights of Indigenous peoples' self-determination to promote a sense of ownership over their natural resources. Welcome, Stony. Next, we have Il, who is the Executive Director of the Analyzing Development Issues Center in Cambodia, or ADIC, since 2011. He's been focusing on land and natural resource governance in Cambodia. He is dedicated to promoting critical thinking and participatory action research, especially with Indigenous communities in Northeast Cambodia. He holds a master's in public policy with a specialization in sustainable development from Maastricht University and an MBA from Norton University. Welcome, Il. We have Hong, who's joining us today. Hong is the director of a local NGO in Vietnam called the Center for Highland Natural Resource Governance Research. He has a PhD in forest resource management with 24 years of biodiversity conservation, natural resource research, policy analysis, and community development. Welcome, Hong. And last, but certainly not least, we have Hong Tong, who is the coordinator of the Land and Livelihoods Program for Village Focus International, or VFI. He also oversees their Green Earth Center, a 40-hectare demonstration farm and training facility. Welcome, Hong Tong. So without further ado, JC, let's start our discussion with you. Would you please present the findings of the two reports? I believe you have some slides as well. So let's get those up. Great. Over to you, JC.
Can you see my screen and can you hear me all right, everyone?
Yes and yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalie, for the introduction and for the invitation. So I'm going to present briefly on a research we conducted with a few other researchers in the region on the specific topic of customary tenure and recognition and formalization of this customary tenure, mainly in the forest landscape of the region. So let me briefly a little bit explain where I'm talking from and what has been the initiatives underlying this process. So the article and the research that I'm presenting now is part of the Mekong State of Land Initiatives, an initiative by the Mekong Region Land Governance project, which tries to bring key data and information about land, the status of land, the change of land, and governance of land resource in the region. And in 2021, if I recall well, or 2022, the MRLG has commissioned the CDE, so the Center for Development Environment, affiliated with the University of Bern in Switzerland, to conduct a study on what we call the agrarian transition. It's a set of very important transformation processes that have a bearing on land use, land tenure in the region. And the core focus of this research has been to not just look analytically and descriptively about what's going on, but also to try to find in the literature pathways about possible solution, because the agrarian transition is typically described as socially unequal and environmentally unsustainable. So we try to look in this research at positive pathways for a more sustainable future. So there are three, this research has been compiled in a special issues in Journal of Land Use Science, which you can access. I will provide you the link afterwards. And the 12 articles of these special issues have been organized in three main thematic areas. The first looks at agricultural commercialization, so sustainable commodity production. The second looks at, and this is what I'm talking about today, recognition and formalization of customary tenure. And the second looks at more the environmental aspect, so the co-creation of agricultural system which have more positive environmental outcomes. So the thing I will really discuss about today is the second thematic area. I don't want to explain too much in terms of data methodology, but what we did, we compile 120 approximately documents, publication from the literature, and we conducted a meta-analysis of these different documents. Yeah. So when it comes to recognition and formalization of customary tenure in the region, I think it's important to recognize that there's a very important underlying tensions that shape how customary tenure is recognized and formalized. We have, on the one hand, a very widespread and massive process of deforestation that basically is happening in all countries in the region to a significant extent. So expand. So the map you have here on the left side of your screen show the extent of deforestation between 2000 to 2019. The red dots basically show the place of deforestation. And you see that between over the last 2 decades, then also nearly 17 millions of hectares of forest have disappeared. And this disappearance of forests represent a very important percentage of forest cover in this different region. The deforestation is mainly driven by agriculture, large scale, but I would say predominantly small scale agriculture, but also mining and infrastructure development. This deforestation is actually the expression of a process of resource commodification through which land and land resources are increasingly becoming commodity which are exchanged on the market. Yeah. So you see commodification of land, the resource that are associated with land, but also the commodification of all the social relation of productions and the access to resource. Yeah? So it's about land, but it's also about labor. And we see in this process of deforestation a very important role played by governments, which are predominantly authoritarian in the region. They have a very important role in basically framing this deforestation, promoting agricultural expansion for exports, but also trying to control their peripheries. And we see this as a constant process and phenomenon across the region. You have, on the other hand, and concomitantly, you have a process through which government in the region are also increasing the area which are under protected area management. So the area delineated to forest conservation or nature conservation. These areas represent a pretty high percentage of the total landmass of some countries. For example, in Cambodia, the total area, protected area represents up to 41% of the land cover, total land area of the country. And if you look at these data over time, you see that the area of protected area actually increases, you know, where while deforestation is also goes unabated, protection and the increase of protected area is also a very important process. And quite interestingly, we see that all these conservation efforts, forest protection efforts, are also becoming increasingly commodified. So also increasingly rely on markets. You know, we are talking a lot about timber certification, ecotourism, of course, the carbon credit market, which is becoming very, very, very important, and all different types of forest plantation. And here as well, we see a very important role played by the state, in terms of controlling and managing the protected area, but also facilitating all this process of commodification, right? So we see here really an erosion of forest landscape, which may have a very important bearing and influence on how people live from the forest, or the ability they have to benefit from the forest. So the key question we have tried to answer in the research is, how do these different forms of forest transformation and commodification process enroll, reconfigure, or undermine customary tenure institutions which are crafted by communities to manage their resources? And There's much at stake, of course. It's estimated that about 70 million people, indigenous or non-indigenous people in the region, depend on forest for their livelihoods to some extent. This forest landscape includes a very large variety of different land use types. We are talking about forests, but not only, we're talking about shifting cultivation, cash crop, agroforestry, tree plantation, you know. And forest is also, I think, needs to be also understood as a very important coping mechanisms, coping instruments to help buffer the unevenness of this very rapid agrarian transition, and the fact that communities are increasingly, have to deal with price volatility related to the agricultural commercialization. So let me briefly, I know that there's been a lot of debate and discussion on this, but let me try to bring here the definition of customary tenure that we have used for this research. We see customary tenure as a set of local rules, norms, or practices that regulate the allocation, the use, but also the ability of people to benefit from the forest landscape, so to access forest, if you like, you know. These rules and norms are determined and sustained by communities, and they are tied up with local institutions, whether these institutions are kinship, ethnicity, or relation between neighbors. There's a lot of, wrong assumption, I would say, when we talk about customary tenure. Usually, very often, customary tenure is assigned as collective right or collective ownership of land. It's not always the case. We see both individual land rights and collective land right given to people, and sometimes these two types of rights coexist together. The customary tenure is not only for or with or by indigenous people, it's also by non-indigenous people. There's very often a sort of, polarization in the discussion between customary and statutory right. In fact, these two sets of rights coexist in sort of hybrid institution where people borrow from norms and borrow from laws to make, their own land tenure situation. And I think also very importantly, customary tenure is not something, it's not the dead weight of the past. It's something which is dynamic, it's not static. It's, of course, it has its legitimacy from traditions, but these traditions have changed over time through the history and also are changing based on the transformation of livelihoods in the region. So the way we have looked at this more conceptually, if you like, in the article, in the paper that we wrote together with, again, a group of scientists from the region, we have used the work of very important economists, an Austro-Hungarian economist called Karl Polanyi, who has worked on market institutions, and he has described the functioning of this market institution in Europe predominantly in the first half of the 20th century. So it was long ago, but his works continue to be very, very relevant and very useful for us to understand what's actually going on here. So we have used his notion of counter movement, which I explain in a moment, to understand the customary tenure in the region. So according to Karl Polanyi, he sees land and the resources on land as sort of entities that support life, right? So he sees that land and resources are inextricably intertwined with man institutions. So as such, he suggests that land and forest resources are not commodities like any others because they are not primarily produced to be exchanged on the market. So they actually meet another function. So Karl Polanyi says that when the logic of market economy turns these fictitious commodities, economy, into pure commodities, then you have a process of disembedment. That is, you have a process through which the economic system becomes disconnected from the social and political system in which they are embedded. you know. And if this logic of disembedment continues and is not tackled or is not addressed, this will lead, he argues, to inevitably to the destruction of society and the natural environment. But Karponani says this is not an inevitable process, because the society, human groups, human communities basically activate protection measures, you know, to counter this movement of collapse, of disintegration. And we have used this metaphor of counter movement to try to understand how customary tenure, or the recognition of customary tenure, or the fight for customary tenure, is actually activated as a counter movement against the process of commodification that I have briefly explained earlier. And we have identified three interrelated forces of counter movement. The first is community pushback contestation. So basically resistance by communities against enclosures, against concession, encroaching into the land, you know. So basically a claim for communities to regain access to their resource. The second force of counter movements that we have identified is more relating to states and the different forms of institution, laws, sub-decrees, tools, instruments that the state have put in place to basically try to recognize and formalize customary tenure. So we are talking here about collective land title, private title, but also co-management for forest. Sometimes we call this community forestry, for example, in Cambodia. Sometimes we call them forest contract in Vietnam, or social forestry in Laos. So this has different names, but it's always the same sort of process through which the state tries to devolve right and responsibility to communities and co-manage forest resource with those communities. And we have a third process, a third counter movement, which we have called, after Nancy Fraser, emancipatory movement, which basically is a call to advocate for more democratic space within communities. And this comes from a realization that sometimes community pushback contestation or state regulatory apparatus, state regulatory frameworks can also result themselves in exclusion, inequality, you know. So you have sometimes a movement of an emancipatory movement, sorry, that tries to address those inequalities generated by the other counter movement, right? So the process of recognition and formalization of customary tenure in the region combines, in one way or another, these three interrelated forces. So what we tried to do in the article, we have tried to, going through all these different publications, 119 publications, we have tried to look at what were the key states instruments that are promoted by the various governments and various ministries in the region to recognize or formalize customary tenure. So we have here listed them down for the different countries in the region. We have tried to look at where these mechanisms or tools apply to what kind of forest types, whether we are talking about protection forest, production or conservation forest, or other types of forest. We tried also to look at, you know, the rule making and the enforcement of these instruments, whether we are talking here about individual recognition, collective recognition, or whether it's a co-management between communities and the state, and the bundles of rights which are involved, right? I'm not going into the detail. What I want to do now is to basically flesh out three key findings that we have identified from this review. The first is that there are typically two different approaches for the recognition of customary tenure, or two different approaches that can be envisaged, if you like. Sectoral approach that recognize specific and bounded resource units, as you can see here on the first frame in the pictures. So you have paddy fields in the lowland area of the landscape, you know, which can be formalized through specific titling measure or land certificates measure by the state. And you have upper in the upper part of the landscapes, you have an area which has been delineated as a community forest. And then in the other way around, the territorial approach is it's not an approach that looks at specifically different resource units, but help to recognize the entire territory, so the entire landscape which are managed by the people. So the sectoral approach tries to single out specific resource units, and these resource units, whether we are talking about land for agriculture, forest, water, grazing area, will be placed under specific laws and jurisdiction by different ministries. This will lead typically to very strong legal recognition, but it will lead to a fragmented landscape because these different resource units will be, will be dependent on specific rules and specific responsibility of different ministries. So the result will be that you get a fragmented landscape. For the territorial approach, it doesn't really look at specific resource units, but try to embrace the diversity of resource in the whole territory. Obviously, it requires collaboration across ministries, between different ministries, between ministries responsible for management of water, of grazing, of agricultural land, forest, etc., which is, of course, not always very difficult, very easy in the region. So the result is that there's a legally weaker recognition of customary tenure, but the landscape overall is more coherent. So these two approaches are traditionally presented as sort of mutually exclusive, as two elements of different elements. In fact, what we see is that these two approaches are not mutually exclusive. For example, you can have a territorial approach through, for example, a land use planning process, which can serve as an interim protection to protect the resources that are managed by the people, while waiting for more formal or formalized recognition of customary tenure. So these two elements, sectoral approach and territorial approach, should not be seen as mutually exclusive.
JC,
the second element is
just to let you know, maybe I know you're finishing your slides, but if we can wrap it up in the next 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, that's all good. So titling is basically, it's perceived as the ultimate form of secure tenure security for the region. And again, here we have a polarization between private and collective land title. Private land titles are definitively the preferred option here in the region because they help facilitate land markets, land collateralization for microfinance institute. Collective are sometimes very limiting. For example, in Laos, collective land title are not valid for agriculture use. In Cambodia, collective land titling is a very complicated process that brings in many different ministries. But it's closer probably to what customary tenure is, because it basically aims to give power to communities to manage the resource as they see fit. So again, these two different types of titles are seen as two polar opposites. In fact, in practice, there is no dichotomy for people between collective and private. Very often, the collective land title is a collective protection for land which are held privately by people. So the two things again are combined together. And the recognition of customary tenure, of course, it's not just about titling, it's about creating institutions that recognize privately owned land and empower communities to basically manage these rights and make decisions accordingly. The third element that comes from our literature review is all this question of community-based forest management. So we have seen a lot of progress over the last 20 years for co-management, but still, as you can see here on the map on the right side, the area that are managed by community under different forms of co-management with the states are pretty small. 1% in Myanmar, 10% in Cambodia, a bit higher in Vietnam, 30%. Overall, these community-based co-management have improved forest condition, and that's probably the most important aspect of it. But The literature is also not very conclusive as to the impact that community-based forest management has had on livelihoods, because the devolution of rights from state to communities is sometimes very incomplete, insufficient. So these devolved rights are not basically delivering on livelihoods outcomes. Communities are usually restricted in managing for degraded forests. They are not allowed to engage in any forms of commercial forestry activities, which makes it very difficult for them to sustain their efforts. So to finish with, I'd like to make some brief presentation about more specific pathways to enable recognition of customary tenure. Of course, there's no magic bullet, but what we see from this literature review is that there are four key elements that are coming up regularly that can contribute to more sustainable outcomes when it comes to recognition of customary tenure. The first is the need for more creative institutional framework. We need a stronger framework which recognize a range of rights, not just ownership with title. We need to have a much wider range of rights recognized, with simplified procedures to grant those rights. And again, look for complementary of approach between sectoral and territorial approach, between private titling, private recognition of rights, and collective recognition of rights. The second element is the need for decentralized and inclusive decision-making. Of course, there is no technical fix here. Everything needs to be, placed in context and flexible, but we definitively need more decentralized structure that empower communities to identify the right and manage those rights by themselves. We need to have some more specific and stronger grievance mechanisms that people can mobilize, when it comes to conflict and conflict resolution as well. The third element is more inclusive monitoring of impact. As I explained earlier, the land tenure institution that people navigate through are hybrid because they borrow from customs and from state law, so they are essentially hybrid. So what is very important here is that the impact or the outcome of customary tenure or livelihoods needs to be framed, or the evaluation of this impact needs to be framed in community's own terms. So community needs to be able to define what is performance, what is sustainability, what is justice. It doesn't mean that there's no space for outside institution. The state is still have a role to play, but basically to support communities to define their own monitoring systems. And the fourth element is the need to build mutual accountability through alliances. So of course, typically the state-community relationship now is much more diverse, and there's much more stakeholders involved through different local networks, international web networks, and you need to recognize these different influences, also to build mutual, or to enhance mutual accountability between the different stakeholders. Sorry, I was a little bit long. That's my last slide. So if you want to have more information about this publication, you can download the policy briefs on the MRLG website. I think 2 are now available. There's another 2 which are in production stage. And the collection or special issue that I've been referring to, it's also available open access in the Journal of Land Use Science. And you have basically the 12 articles which are available for download. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, JC, for the great publication. I know it's hard to condense everything in a short time, and you did a great job. So thank you very much for walking us through both the policy brief and the journal article. So your last slide highlighting the pathways to enable the recognition of customary tenure in forest landscapes underscored the importance of building mutual accountability through alliances. I think this is probably a great way to lead to the discussion for our panelists, who've all been engaged in some way or another in customary tenure alliances and coordinations. in their respective countries. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from them and on the state of customary tenure and pathways forward. So JC, thank you very much for sharing your screen. I think we can, yeah, great. Our first question this morning is for our panelists on the evolution and the recognition of customary tenure. So Hong Tong, could you start us off by discussing how customary tenure has evolved in your country over time, and how has the legal status changed? And how does your government address customary tenure recognition for local communities? Over to you, Hong Tong.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, just want to sort of express my sincerely thanks to organizer MRLG and Land Portal for organizing this event, dialogue to happen, and also inviting me to be part of the dialogue. I'm happy to share my contribution based on my own experience and also knowledge working in this sector for many years. Regard to your questions, I just want to share that Lao, like other countries in the region and also in other regions, many of Lao people still have been using customary land for their livelihoods for so long. That based on their tenure, land tenure or customary tenure. So, but then over the last couple of decades, that customary tenure has been challenged because of the land pressure created by increasing land investment projects, especially land-based investment projects coming in. So then the government trying to enhance the land tenure security or land tenure recognition of those people by creating a policy related to land use planning. They started to talk about that in 1979, and then assigned the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry to pilot it in 1993. And then as a result, they used that pilot to develop a land use planning guideline, which was improved again in 2009 and called Participatory Land Use Planning, or PLUP, PLUP. So for this land use planning process, map basically start with the demarcating the village boundary and then map out different land use types inside the village boundary, and then demarcate and or measure different agricultural land plots, and then register and issue temporary land use certificate. That's the first time that increased the recognition of the customary land right of those people who live in rural area. And then the customary tenure was further recognized by land titling project, which started in 1997 with the support from the development partners like World Bank, AusAid, and also German government. With that, the different land parcel has been registered and also received land title, which is the highest secure land tenure. However, this land title just for those who live outside the forest. People who live inside the forest are not eligible for their land to be recognized or by the government because it's conservation area. However, in 2009, the revised forestry law and land law officially recognized customary land tenure of people living inside the forest area, which is really happy on also and a great news for those people, because 1/3 of Lao people live inside the forest. And recently, the resolution of Standing Committee of National Assembly was endorsed in order to open the door for the government to issue land titles and land use certificates for those who live inside the forest areas. This is the really landmark resolution, and also the great news for local people who live inside the forest. Then with this resolution, the government right now preparing to pilot the recognition of the customary land right of those people who live inside the forest. They work with the different partners, with the support from the MRLG and also from the World Bank and German government to pilot it. As a result, this will improve the policy in the future and also technical guideline for rolling out the recognition of the land rights of those people who live inside the forest in the future. Back to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much, Hong Tong, for those important insights. I think key here is the recent National Assembly resolution is a very exciting development in Laos, particularly because it allows for the titling of individual land within forest areas. So we are definitely looking forward to seeing how things progress.
Yes.
I will go on to Hong. Hong, how has customary tenure evolved in Vietnam? I understand that there are some important legal developments. How is the legal situation changed? And can you address forest tenure for communities and land conflicts? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for very comprehensive presentation from JC and Hong Kong's information about Laos customary tenure. Yes, so talking about customary land and forest tenure, like customary tenure, we often think about the land and forest in Vietnam. So in general, had been formed and existed for 1,000 years. So going through the country history, it may be seen in different states of development. So state of feudalism, like before French colony in Vietnam, before, and state from the French colonial periods from 1844 to 1945. Then during the war around 1946 to 1986, and the final state now is the country economic reform period from 1986 to present. So in general, so the right to land and forest through the recognition in different states in my country, even in Vietnam, even now. So it recording in different law and legal frameworks. So in the Vietnam mixed context, land and natural forests, may you know, are owned by entitled people with the state representing owner and unifies management. However, like we mentioned about ethnic community have approached, manage and use this kind of type of natural resources for many generations. Yes, a lot of communities have been managing the land and forest 1,000 years. So still the controlling, the managing. According to the different rule and law institutions for managing these resources formed by community. And the concept of community forest and the other kind of community ownership, like I mentioned, is officially recognized in the Forestry Law 2017 and Land Law 2024. This very new land law. In this land law, especially in the Forestry Law 2017, the law mentioned about the community have a right to manage based on the existing space. It means for the right for host community in the according to forestry law. And also in the land law, there are so many provisions mentioned about the right to land and forest for minority people and also for community people. However, so like mentioned from JC presentation, we are also facing a lot of challenges when protecting and preserving the traditional land and forest or customary tenure. Like for instance, about the land conflict or land forest, the dispute happening in different areas especially in minority people due to economic development, urbanization, and population growth. So, for instance, about some economic development due to building infrastructure, developing some industries, the project, so it can make a reduce of traditional land and forest. So, the other like a minor challenges I want to mention is a gap between the law and law enforcement. So people are fighting different way, doing different solutions. Even government organization had been fighting different solutions to ensure that the law will be enforced or implemented clearly and meaningful and reality from the law to practice. That's some information about customary tenure in my country.
Thank
Back
you
to
very
Natalie.
much. Thank you, Hong. Yeah, it's great to hear also about this new development of the land law, an important development in Vietnam with potential to increase tenure security in its implementation. So I think what's key here is what you mentioned, the gap between law and law enforcement. So we're looking forward to seeing how this land law is implemented together with the forest law to improve tenure security. So thank you, Hong. Now let me turn to Stony from Myanmar. Stony, please tell us about the evolution of customary tenure in Myanmar and its implications for Indigenous peoples. Over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, everyone, especially for inviting me for this platform. I'm not expert, but I will try to like talk on our experience in our works. Just like many Asian countries, Myanmar is consists of various indigenous community known as ethnic nationality because most of the country doesn't officially recognize indigenous people. So each group has like unique culture, practice, traditions, and methods of land management, which includes our ways of management of customary tenure. So in Myanmar, agriculture is the main livelihood, and so making land is very vital for the people, especially in indigenous peoples in Myanmar. So customary tenure is considered as a pre-existing right, which includes various way of obtaining land use rights and ownerships. It is different from each community, but there are some certain common, such as clearing virgin land first and inheriting land based on our traditional practice and allocating by a village leader. The fact that customary tenure in Myanmar is complex, believing like many Asian countries as well, encompassing individuals and communal ownerships. So the customary tenure practice is actually beyond the use of land for farming and agriculture. The fact it is that our way of life, and it's also a way of preserving our cultural identity, and it is also our territorial rights, which determine the identity of the people in it. And it is also one of a solution that nature-based solution for climate change and biodiversity conservation. So what I mean is that I would like to highlight why recognition of customary tenure is very important. But despite Myanmar is our livelihood is based on agriculture, most of agricultural lands are lack of proper recognitions, especially in our indigenous community area. But there was once initiative from the government in 2016, which is adoptment of national land use policy, which is to initiate legal recognition of customary tenure through development of new land law. However, due to the current political crisis, this law has yet not been enacted. So because of the lack of this kind of legal recognitions and protections of our customary land tenure, there's lots of land confiscation and by protected area management, mining, and ground grabbing by the government itself and elite members. So these are the things that we have been facing. So back to you, Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stony, for sharing the rich history of customary tenure in Myanmar. And I think one inspiring thing to be taken from your intervention is that customary tenure, regardless of the political situation, continues to exist and evolve and is agile in many ways. So thank you for that. Il, what about in Cambodia? Can you tell us about the evolution of customary tenure over time, as well as the role of the government and the impacts on land use? Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalie, and also thanks Neil from the land portals, and also to JC for shedding light on the presentations of or the sharing of the panelists. Yeah, in Cambodia, these issues of customary tenures has been involving in this communal management of land resources, the forest resources, by indigenous communities and also by non-indigenous community. In this context, I refer to the non-indigenous community involved the management of community forestry and community protected areas. And for indigenous community or indigenous people, they involve their three things. One is the community forestry, community protected area, and another one is the communal land titling, or most people refer to it as indigenous communal land titling, or ICLT in short. This has been practiced for time immemorials and even continue until today. And in the Cambodian context, where Cambodia has evolved a lot, especially in the early 90s, when Cambodia opened up the economy, there are a lot of opportunities, and also there are also challenges like that. One of the things that we see major changes in the evolutions of this legal recognition is that by the 2021, Cambodia has enacted the land law that actually recognize the rights of the indigenous people to the ancestral domains. Not only that, there's also a legal instruments, such as, for example, the sub-degree on community forestry in 2003, and the community protected area later in 2007. These two additional sub-degrees actually add further strengths to the law that is in land law in 2021. 2001. Yeah. And with specific provisions on the indigenous communal land titling that aims actually to promote the cultural practices among indigenous community is the issuance of the sub-degree 83 in 2009, which actually provide a more detailed procedures and the process of how the indigenous communities can register their land collectively. And also the forestry law in 2002, it also recognized the indigenous people's rights to forest resource management. And the idea of the importance of recognizing these customary tenures, as I mentioned earlier, is really to protect the cultural heritage and the livelihood of indigenous people, because in Cambodia, we always refer to this as land means life. So indigenous community without land is very hard for them. And therefore, securing the land rights and ensure that sustainable management practice is really key in this recognitions of customary tenures. And moreover, it involves this responding to any emerging or ongoing conflicts on lands and the support of biodiversity conservations. For governments, in order to address this issue of to recognize this customary tenures, especially in indigenous community, they involve three different ministries. The first stage is involve Ministry of Rural Development, which recognize the self-identifications of those indigenous community as a particular group of peoples. And then the second stage is moving to the Ministry of Interior, which recognize, we call it legal entity recognitions, which give the opportunity for them to work together in groups and manage the land. And then the second major stage is, the third major stage is the Ministry of Land Management, Urban Planning and Constructions. These are the last stage which they actually provide the collective land titles to the indigenous communities. For your information, at this stage, the government is now working on amending the land law 2001. And there are a lot of civil society organizations and community are working together in different meetings, seminars at subnational levels and also at national levels, and now bring inputs from different stakeholders to put together. So still now in the process of doing that amendment of the land law in Cambodia. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Il. There is a lot going on in Cambodia, a lot of different processes, but we're glad to see and hear that there's progress, even though there are various challenges as well. So let's move on to our second round of questions, which will focus on major challenges and solutions in the countries. How are these challenges being addressed, and what approaches are helpful to increase tenure security for local communities? I would like to start with Hong Tong. Could you tell us about the situation in Laos?
Natalie, can you repeat your question again, please?
So the question is, how are challenges, and so we're talking about major challenges and solutions in the Mekong countries, particularly how are challenges being addressed and what approaches are helping to increase tenure security for local communities?
I'd like to start with the challenges. There are so many challenges that we have faced to sort of in terms of recognizing the land right or customary land rights of the people, because the majority, a lot of people are still using, as I said, land based on the customary tenure, and especially those who live in rural areas far away and inside the forest. And these are like different groups, and they don't know exactly about their own rights, especially land rights based on the law and regulations. And therefore, they don't know how to claim their rights and also to protect their rights. This is the first thing. So then, secondly, another challenge is that different stakeholders relevant to promote the recognition of the customary land rights also don't understand really the issue related to the customary tenure, how important it is, so that they didn't really pay attention enough to promote them, to work with this different stakeholders. For the government agencies, definitely there are so many government agencies have to work together. So the coordination, the cooperation between the government agencies also another challenges, because they have to work cross ministries, cross agencies, and also different layers. So this is another thing that that's put a lot of issues and a lot of problem and also challenges that need to go. And plus, the government especially has been facing the lack of or not enough capacity and also resources to implement these things, because this is for the whole country. So they need a lot of support from the development partners, international organizations. So this has to put effort together to help build capacity of the government, especially to be able to implement their roles in order to protect the customary tenure of the local people, to help their customary tenure recognized officially right now. And we also encourage the development partners and international to help build awareness of the local communities, to know and to be active on their own rights, in order to claim their rights and also to protect their rights. We also need to also help strengthen the local mechanism, especially when we talk about the grievance redress mechanisms, especially at the local level. We know that there's no really sort of a lack capacity and resources to protect the people's land rights. So we need to help improve them, to strengthen the capacity to be able to help local people. We also have to, another thing is that we have to sort of help improve the government to improve their legislation and their policy by feeding up all the lessons and also bringing in best practices and experiences from other countries that may be applicable to Laos. So then they can use that to test it out in here in Laos. And if it's appropriate, then that can feed up to the policy and law and guidelines later. That's from my side. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you very much, Hong Tong. I think an important theme that I'm sure we'll hear throughout the whole webinar is this importance of sharing across the region, sharing and engaging and addressing very similar issues that are present in the other countries. So thank you for that. Moving on to Hong, I understand on that note, there are similar challenges in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, what are the challenges that you're facing? And could you please describe solutions that are helping local communities improve their tenure security?
Okay, thank you, Natalie. Firstly, I would like to say some challenges first. So yeah, similar with Laos, customary tenure, especially land and forest for minority people or community ownership are facing with some challenges. Firstly, the concept of community is not a legal entity. It means so it is limited the access to land and forest right for community forest model for any kind of community who are owning who are have ownership to land and forest. Due to therefore community not allowed to do some important right, for instance about exchange, transfer, lease, or borrows a mortgage the money from the bank. So communities that have a right to protect the forest, protect the land, then they, of course, they not being able to implement some right to get more, for instance, to get more benefit, like to do business or to do that exchange. So due to again also some the other legal land law and forestry law also say the community have right to receive the certificate. However, in the other law, they not recognize community is a legal entity. So secondly, due to rapid economic development creates more pressures and also to make lose the customary tenure of land and forest to minority people. I would like to provide some example about the establishing some state forest enterprise in Vietnam. So due to the economic development requirement for the government, due to the innovations requirement for the country, so there are so many state forest enterprise has set up in many years, and it creates a lot of dispute and challenges for the local people because there is not recognized the clear boundary between traditional land and forest of minority people of traditional land and forest and the new company new protected area, for instance about that. Moreover, they not get full consensus from the local people, so is one of challenges for the local people for the custom anywhere in our country. Uh, uh, and third challenges, we think about the issue land and forest use right certificate to community-based laws. It is estimated around 50% of community forest they get certificates. Also, it means there are a lot of community they are managing land and forest even 1,000 years they without getting the certificate, land right certificate. It affects to many aspects in terms of receiving the outline support, for instance, about the carbon credit support or some environmental service payment, and the other support from outsiders. They often ask about the legal entity for the community, legal ownership for the community, for the local people. In this case, they do not equal right to accept outside benefit support. So mentioning some solution, I think there are some important solutions to solve these issues. The firstly, to promote local authority to fully implement legal policy to ensuring residential and productive land for ethnic people who are lacking land and forest. So a lot of family also, and communities, they are lacking land for it and for living, for production. So also according to the law, land law and different kind of policy in the central level, they all do emphasize the requirement to give land and forest for the local people. Also, some of them are managing the traditional land and forest without recognition from government. So they force the local authority to implement this policy. We we should government should have a strong monitoring evaluation mechanism to promote this kind of solution. Secondly, we think should capacity building training for communities so they understand their right and obligation related to land, and therefore they can effectively use traditional land and forest. That is a good way to improve, to help them to protect the traditional customary tenure. Also, try to use according to the law, and they can help to protect their rights. And third, is state continue to have the different kind of policy to promote land and forest allocation to the local people from the current land, with managing by the communal people committee. It estimated there are more than 3 million hectares are managed, land and forest are managing by the, like belong to state, to the people committee. However, so there are so many people are lacking land and forest. So we had been finding different kind of solutions to promote how to hand over that land, like a temporary land from the people committee to the local people. So states should continue to have a strong policy, so should have a good or feasible policy to have to hand over this kind of land for that to the local people. And and finally, we from the MRLG project, we recognize that it is better to promote the policy that have recognized the right of local people in conserving biodiversity. So a lot of communities, they are protecting the biodiversity in Vietnam. However, according to the law, they not mention anything about the roles of local people in preserving biodiversity. So there are some like a feasible solution, I think, to show to protect the customary tenure in Vietnam. That's all.
Thank you very much, Hong. I believe we'll hear a little bit later more about these examples of solutions, but I think something that's very interesting in your intervention is the alternative, sort of looking at alternative policies that might ensure rights for communities, such as preserving biodiversity. So looking for alternative pathways for recognition, particularly in a space where we don't often see there to be much flexibility in terms of recognition of rights. So thank you very much for that. I'll move on to Stony. Stony, how are the challenges in Myanmar different with regard to Indigenous and local communities, and what is being done to overcome them?
Thank you again. Regarding the challenge, because we have many challenges, as you all know, so I will just focus on the customary land tenure. So I mentioned quite a few in my previous. So since there's no legal recognitions of city customary tenure in Myanmar, we have many challenges, of course, like land grabbing for many reasons. But here I would like to highlight some challenges apart from this land grabbing. Because of not recognitions of customary tenure, and also enforcing the city territorial law, which encourage the privatizations of land, there's a certain level of the lack of sense of ownerships over our customary tenures, and also the increase of privatizations of the customary tenure lands. Because like in the country, the constitution clearly state that all lands and natural resources are state property, and also some legal framework also given favor to privatization of community lands. So because when there's are no sense of ownership over the community land, there's are risks, many risks that can happen, not only for the livelihood also, but also the protection of ecosystem and biodiversity and all. So the solution is that in 2018, the MRLG Alliance was formed to work together as a workforce for recognitions and protections and promotion of the customary tenure from legal framework. So in our work include documentation of existing customary tenure practice across the country for evidence-based advocacy, and we also produce a lot of the thematic study and also propose for legal recognitions. And also, despite the current political situations, we still work on the continue the alliance to work on these customary tenure documentation, and also because we believe that awareness raising is also very important, and also revitalizing of our good practice also important, so that the sense of ownership will be restored. And also there are some certain challenges in our work in the current because of this encourage and like the peoples have been, it had been more than 70 years that the government has been demolish our customary tenure practice. So in the community, there's some certain knowledge gap in the practice of customary tenure, and also there's some certain, because the customary tenure there is no proper delineations in the boundary. So there's some challenges in the work of customary tenure documentation. So as I mentioned earlier, so the community, the alliance members are now working for the revitalizations of the customary tenure practice through documentation and awareness raising, believing that the work will ensure and help to have interim protections in the community level, and to be ready when the country is resolved for recognitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stony. Great to hear about the agility again and the flexibility of communities in Myanmar. And thank you also for sharing the importance of customary tenure documentation as being a vital tool for securing customary tenure rights, even as an interim protection measure, something that we heard also JC mention in his presentation. So Il, back to you. What are the major challenges in Cambodia? How are they being addressed? And can you tell us more about efforts to make tenure security more inclusive?
Thank you so much. Yes. Before sharing my view on the major challenges, I'd like to give some basic facts and figures about regarding the customary tenures and the practice here. As the point I mentioned earlier, the registrations of the indigenous land, communal land titlings that was that actually at a final stage under the Ministry of Land Management, Urban Planning and Constructions. As of now, they have already registered up to more than 40 indigenous communities out of more than 500 indigenous community in Cambodia. Secondly, the community protected area, on short CPA, they have more than 170 community protected area that's already registered and running, and this is under the Ministry of Environment. And another one is the CF, the community forestry. They have more than 600 community forestry areas and coverings more than 500,000, more than 500,000 hectares. So these are basic facts about the achievement that has gone through so far. Like I mentioned earlier, that with all this government's intervention, the civil society groups and the community people, along with these existing laws and regulation in place, still there are challenges in actual implementation, even in the law itself too. But I'm talking about more into the implementations of this. There are four major challenges. Number one is the internal disagreement within the community, because as Tony has already mentioned, customary practice doesn't have the boundary, because people practicing within cultivations and livelihood strategies and so on that actually run from one community to each other. There's no line in between them. So when you start this whole process of having this process that actually formalizing or recognizing by the law, then so you start pointing out where's the boundary. So there's always the negotiation that actually gone on between one community to another before they can proceed to the ICLT registrations. And these involve a lot of process that NGOs and government officials at different levels working together to address that problem before they can proceed. The more than 40 indigenous community that have already registered has already been successfully done, not without any challenge. And the challenge that I've mentioned is one of them there. Second thing is the overlapping claims of these conservation areas and the economic land concession. There's a policy of granting companies spaces where they can invest on major plantations and things like that as part of this economic land concession policy. So the overlap of this area has also hindered the abilities of community to register the title. And that's why many of these communities that have already been registered take years before they can complete. But through years of experience and reflections with NGOs and the government, they were able to find out lessons learned and try to speed up the process. And that's why during the last 8 years, the government has been able to issue the title of more than 30 out of those 40 plus, more than 30. So within this such a short period of time, they were able to accomplish so much. Again, not without challenge. So again, addressing these issues of overlapping claim between the conservation area, which is under Ministry of Environment, is actually taking time. There are areas that have already been accomplished, but there are areas that are still ongoing too, and until now. And the third issue is when I talk about community forestry and community protected area, is issues of illegal logging and encroachment is still being done by outsiders. And this is actually pose a very important issue for the management and the communities, people to manage the resource in a sustainable way. But there are some good examples which I have also worked closely with them, and they gain recognition from the government, rewards and things like that too. The fourth point is the lack of the technicals and financial capacity to effectively manage their protected areas and forest resources. Oftentimes, they depend on outsider financial support and the technical support to be able to manage that. And also in terms of the coordination with various government officials, there's always complaints about the lack of staffing times and labor, being able to address those issues when community people actually call them for support in addressing those issues of encroachment and so on. So again, technical and financial capacity to community and committees and so on to manage these resource in a sustainable way is really required. So to me, in order to address these issues, we need an ongoing support, because I'm in a one-shot support at such a short period of time to support them is going to present a major problems for them to be able to accomplish the long-term management of the resources. Therefore, they need that kind of support. And another thing is also the collaboration between various agencies and stakeholders, the NGOs, the communities, and the government officials at different levels. Really very important to work together and try to understand that. And in this process, the ideas of inclusivities, where you bring in the role of women, the marginalized community to be part of that process is really key. Because frankly, I often see in these conventional ways of engaging women in the process, whereby you have like a village meeting or bigger meeting. And sometimes when I saw in the events where I joined, is that the women do not talk because they are out of their own space or in their own areas, so they don't feel confident. But if they're approached that are more informal, when you approach them, there are a lot of things that they could talk on the ground. So to me, bring them in different ways of exercising their own opinions or their to take part in the process of this decision making will help them to say, look, this is the area where that belongs to our customary areas, right? For communal registration, for example, or even to design to devise this CPA area, the CF area, where women's participations in that process become very crucial. And there are also a training on land rights. The training, sometimes they speak like different language or different understanding between the local people and the officials. So communicating on the same terms of land rights issues and process and like that, it is very important to have like an ongoing process of this capacity building. So to me, that would be key here. Thank you so much. Yeah, back to you.
Thank you very much, Il. And I am very happy to hear the mention of inclusivity and meaningful inclusivity in terms of how to get every member of the community involved in these processes, particularly talking about women. It's something that is a huge issue that is not often discussed in these platforms. And so thank you for that. I think let's continue and stay with Il for that. Just a quick note to all of our panelists, we would like to have some time for Q&A. So if we could make our responses a little bit more concise and succinct, then we'll hopefully have some more time for Q&A. But Il, back to you. You were talking about the challenges and addressing these challenges, and we'd like to hear some successful examples of tenure security and what factors contributed to this success, and how could these successful examples be scaled up or replicated. You are still on mute, Il.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. Actually, there are a lot of examples. When I talk about these more than 40 communities actually spread across several provinces, and the two major ones is in the Northeast Cambodia is Ranakiri and Mandukri. You have many of them already registered, and also many of them has already been through the process, although they haven't completed yet. And this has been gone on through a process that involved a lot of civil society organization, the NGOs, particularly the NGO that has actually devoted their time and resources for working with the indigenous community out there. And there is a recognition from the government already that the NGO play a very important role of managing the conflicts on the ground between the communities and within the community themselves too. So when that is at that level resolved, the further steps and process, for example, in drawing the preliminary map on the grounds, is really that require a lot of people's participation, including women's and neighboring villages and so on. So you have the government officials, you have the local people, the NGOs working together actually to be able to design map that is actually recognized by the community themselves and those of neighbor. And then the further steps of applying. And when you apply, you need those maps, you need applications and things like that. And later, when measuring the land, there's also an issues of the boundary overlapping and so on. Again, when you actually measure it together with the Ministry of Land Management. So again, these various stakeholders, when they start involving in that process, it actually leads to a lot of helpful exercise altogether, if you like. That really leads to the end of land registration. Normally, it takes about a few years or even less. I mean, during this last almost 10 years. But the earlier period, it takes more than 10 to 15 years actually to be able to accomplish one. So it's really a lengthy and a complex process actually to go through. But right now, there are a lot of those communities that we can show as an example of how they've been through the process of accomplishing this one. So I think basically those are the important things. Like I called on earlier of the participation of different stakeholders in that process is really key in achieving these results. Yeah. And same thing for scaling up, if you could do the same, that could be replicated elsewhere. But one important thing here, the socio-economic change in the country these days, that this issue of financial debt and so on, is actually bring the local community to a different attention. Instead of, for example, do we go for this tension here between whether I go for indigenous communal land title or I go for private title. So there's a negotiation between them within the community, because many of these community have already been through the process midway through, some of them, and they are now just waiting for the last stage. But then I get caught in between because of this major transformation that's gone on. So, and this is the point that I mentioned earlier, that you may need NGOs or other community representative who may be influential in trying to bring these people together and to find a way to address them, so that they have a common ideas or common ground to move further to the CLT process. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Il. Yeah, I think a fascinating example from Cambodia and the ICLT process, and the decision that communities are faced with, especially indigenous communities, in terms of what pathway should they take to secure their tenure, and the various different options there. But glad to hear a successful example. For the rest of our panelists, I'd like to just note that it would be great if you could do one example of a success and one sort of scaling up recommendation. So on the note of collaboration, Hong, we'd like to hear one example from Vietnam. Again, please try and keep this brief, and one suggestion for scaling up for success.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. Actually, the role of local community in protecting and managing the traditional land and forests can express effectively way in our country, in Vietnam and the other country. It is true that we could say the local people or native people are keeping the key of the of the good thing in terms of protecting the natural resources management, in terms of maintaining the biodiversity value, even climate change, the combat. So in in realities, the community not only protects the natural resources, but also they can maintain and preserving the identity culture. Is very, very important. Such a good way to keep the diversity of the community in different country, in our country too. In fact, there are thousands of good practices, bad practices in our country, in Vietnam. However, I would like to mention once the model of community-based conservation black language with white check in Quang Binh province. The model was receiving support from the MRLG project. From the like a volunteer group, almost they used to was a watcher, the legal hunter, and now join together to contribute to protect the land girls. Now this area become a famous location. I think would like to say attractive destination for visitors to see the how biodiversity value, and also that is a potential for develop ecotourism in the future. It would receive a lot of attention from both the scientists, NGO, and the other organization, especially government. Now, this model also has been receiving a lot of support from the government at different level, although they are facing with a lot of challenges. They don't have the right to receive any support from the outsider. They are not a legal entity. It means they don't have a right to manage their model. However, they have a right to work to protect the biodiversity, to keep the traditional land, communal land in the Quang Binh province in our country. That is one of best practices of protecting customary tenure in our country among 1,000 models. That's all. That's for my case. Back to Natalie.
Thank you very much, Hong. Yes, and I note that your background is also those Longurs, but great great example about pivoting and by collaborating together with community members themselves, finding incentives for them to then ensure their tenure is secure, but also that they are working on conservation in the area. So thank you very much for that. Stony, I would like to come to you, and because we've heard already some very successful examples in Myanmar of customary tenure documentation as an interim protection measure, I wonder if you could answer what could potentially be done at a regional level to scale up these successful examples. Over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. Because Myanmar has yet to be developed a city recognition framework, in the initiative for the recognitions of city customary tenure, our civil society and also Mekong Region community and international community has played crucial role for the initiative. So their contributions an effort has led to significant achievements, such as in Myanmar in 2016, the government has adopted national land use policy, which mandates for recognition of customary tenure, and also amended farmland law, which recognizes shifting cultivation as one of farmland. And also the ASEAN member states have able to develop and adopt the ASEAN guidelines on recognition of customary tenure and forest landscapes, which is, I believe, very important a successful achievement. To scaling up, it is very important that to utilize the ASEAN guidelines in our workforce, in our advocacy, and also sensitizations and rehabilitations of the customary tenure in the community level, and also advocacy to the governments. And also we have already developed a lot of customary tenure documentation, and then this resource should be leveraged to scale up the success and advocating for the government to adopt and implement the ASEAN guideline for city recognitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stony. And we are very glad that you mentioned the ASEAN guidelines on the recognition of customary tenure in forested landscapes. These are important guidelines. They were endorsed in 2022, and they're now active. So as Stony mentioned, these can be used as a leverage to start this conversation and engage governments at a national level to encourage them to recognize customary tenure. I would encourage all of our audience to take a look at these important guidelines as well. So Hong Tong, over to you. Could you give us one very quick example, a successful example in Laos before we move on? Over to you, Hong Tong.
Thanks. We'll be quick. I'll give you one example in the north where we have together with the DALAM, the Department of Agriculture Land Management, under the MAF pilot. They call the enhancement of the recognition of customary land tenure through communal land registration using the land tool called Social Tenure Domain Model, or STDM, with the support from the GLTN, UN Habitat. Up in Luang Prabang and Sieng Khong, what we did was kind of we map out all communal land, and then we use this software, which is the software like a GIS software, and link with the human aspect or social aspect, and put it into the system where everybody, including village authority, district authority, provincial authority, can see as an official database. And then the villagers can use this to sort of show that whenever the companies or investments comes, this is already registered under the government system. And whenever the land titling or land registration come in, this can plug it in. And this can be this case show that we use technology to enhance the recognition of the customary tenure of the villagers in the north. Back to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much. So for one last quick question before we go to question and answer. We'd like to learn a little bit, especially because you touched on technology, Hong Tong. We'd like to learn a little bit about how access to land data and information affects customary tenure. So what challenges do they face in accessing this information, or others in accessing this information? And I would like to ask JC's thoughts on this. Again, JC, if you could make your answer quick so we can move forward, we'd like to hear from you in terms of accessing data and solutions or improvements to accessing data.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we would all agree that access to data is super important for communities, for support group, for the state, of course. I mean, I think data is not just about, to know where the boundaries of, the community forestry is. It's also to zooming out a little bit, is to enable communities to understand what's going on around the place, process of deforestation, of infrastructure development that may impact indirectly the area they manage. So what we see at the moment in the data landscape, if you like, is that access to data is very difficult, because usually data is hosted in different ministries, and data is power, so it's very difficult from one ministry to share data with another ministries. Left alone the data sharing with other stakeholders outside. Even within ministries, sometimes very difficult to get information. A second problem is the sort of disconnection you have with between the data provider, those who hold the data, and those who need the data. So you have a number of initiatives that have tried to address this problem. The open development landscape have also tried to do a good job. Sometimes it comes with some problems in terms of data access and check of data. There's now a wealth of remote sensing GIS data available on different data repository. The problem here is, of course, the manipulation of this data. So I think a very promising way to empower communities to really use data is basically having them working with this. I don't know if you can see my phone on the screen. Having communities being the provider of their own data. And we have seen this in some work we have done together with IL, for example. We have seen people, basically working with staff from Ministry of Land Management, for example, having their own base map on their phone and basically generating their own data. So, and becoming basically cadastral officer in their own village, I think that's not only help with data provision and creation, but also it helps with in terms of empowerment, and data empowerment. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think there are so many aspects to being empowered to engage with data, and that's a real key question, and it will be a really huge challenge moving forward, especially when we see a lot of technical developments like artificial intelligence and these sort of things. How will that interfere with the land administration? And it would be great to hear from our other panelists on this question. So Hong, very briefly, can you tell us about the implications of lack of access to land information in Vietnam and what that means for local communities?
Yes, thank you, JC, for sharing some general challenges about accessing information, accessing the land data at the central level. However, we see at a grassroots level, with a reality level, we see some problem happening about in terms of accessing land information in Vietnam. So firstly, from various minority people, they cannot access land and forest, land information about the land administration, due to they live in the isolated areas, due to they don't have any kind of technology, that kind of mean of accessing like a smartphone or something. Because due to they don't have internet connection, so totally they live like isolated with outside, with the administration system. So in this case, the manner of sharing information is come from the internal community. They often share the traditional land and exchange land by the traditional regulation, traditional identity. It means it leads to the conflict between the people and people, then between inside and outside conflict, a lot of challenges. So we often think due to the both subjective and active reason. I say outside reason, for instance. So of course, according to the laws, government want to train to give a different kind of racial awareness for the local people to in terms of sharing the law uh, about the obligation, right, or benefit from the land management, for instance, was up. However, due to there are some a lot of difficult thing or challenging thing, including lacking of sources. So local people cannot accept this kind of knowledge. Moreover, local people, especially minority people, in according to the law, they have right to access free access about the um, paralegal. If there are some conflict within at grassroots level with the reality, they have a right to access free access to these services supported provided from government. However, they don't know about these services and right, so right to to access it. Finally, I think not so many, but there are this phenomenon is existing. It is undeniable to see that the lacking the consensus from the among for project development, implementing project development in different community. Also, some projects they organize a consulting process to ask people, but not so much people know about that kind of information due to many reasons, including lacking the local language, lacking the information transparency. So a lot of things there. So it lead to the conflict, to the customer tenure. That's all. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Hong. I want to give our other panelists a opportunity to respond to the data question, and I'd like to ask if they can do so in a very quick fire way. You know, give a one minute response. We'll start with Il, please, if you can, just a quick response reflecting on land data and information.
Yes, just quick. Yeah, thank you so much. I think the role of the young people is really very important. And JC has already mentioned that they have actually used the digital data collection on their lands and so on. So this is really key. But I think we need to go beyond that. For example, there was a case when, there's a letter from the authorities and the people read the letter, but they didn't understand that. So to me, interpretations of that, is there a process or platform which actually help to interpret those information into language that is more accessible to them? Not only the young people, but the older people sometimes do not speak Khmer or read Khmer at all. They speak their own language only. So making the language that is accessible to them. Not only that, but again, help them to interpret the kind of information they have. For example, they have these beautiful maps. They don't know what does it mean to them. Or if there is any, for example, any investor actually coming in to take big piece of land, do this company came in with the legal rights and license granted by the government, for example, do they have access to those information? So to me, having information and this thing in place is really important. In addition to that, quickly, on the FPIC, the free, prior, and informed consent. Many people are talking about this. It's like a buzzword, but what does it actually mean? That has to be actually spelled out and explained to people. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Il. I want to move on to questions, and I wonder, Hong Tong and Stony, do you have something really pressing that you can say in less than a minute about land data? Because I think it's really important that we get at least one question in. So, okay, Hong Tong, please, very quickly.
Yes, it's really important to make land deal more transparent, which can help villagers to protect their land tenure rights. So there has been an initiative to support central level information collections about concessions that are located at the provincial level that can improve the transparency in our land deals and the villages can have access. Secondly, the DOL, the Department of Land, has they call the central database of land registration. They call Lao Land Recs. So all the land registration and titles has been kept or stored in this system. So where everybody can have all the government officials and agencies can have access to this in a systematic way. Finally, the land use planning information will be kept in another database called LUIS, Land Use Information System, which is stored at the Department of Land as well. So this is kind of a key database that can be managed and make the land deal and land information more transparent.
Thank you,
Back to you.
Thank you. Stony, do you have a 30-second intervention? If not, I think we can move on to, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I will try to be brief. Yes, I believe Myanmar has the most complex and difficult access to informations and database. You already mentioned that in the community, many people doesn't understand the announcement and the announcements of the governments. So and then also in many places in the ground, even the government staff doesn't understand what is the announcement and also the kind of lack of information. So I believe that you already mentioned about the FPIC. So it's really important to do FPIC whenever there are new policy amendments. Also, the consultation, also awareness raising also is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great, succinct response as well. I appreciate that. And apologies for running out of time. We have so much information to share and so many successful examples to share. I'd like to have a moment to respond to some questions in the chat, particularly one question. We have a question from Myanmar about someone who is doing research on forest landscape governance and climate change through a gender lens. And they're curious on gender-related issues, especially in forest landscape governance within the Mekong region. So I would like to request JC to answer this question, and then I will ask Hong as well to follow up. Please, before I forget, please try and answer within 1 minute, and I will be harsh on the time here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've already tried to address this question in the Q&A section. But so yeah, and my apologies because I didn't talk too much about gender, though it's very important. What we found in the review research we did is that the fact that the forest cover decreases makes that a very, very important area of work that the women used to do is now collapsing, is now disappearing. So increasingly, to compensate for this loss of income, the women of the families have to engage increasingly into other, income generating activities, and usually it's wage, which sometimes relate to or is associated with mobility. So not only, the disappearance of forests changed the income structure of the family, but also the division of labor between men and women also changed a lot. And yeah, that's one of the key elements we found.
Excellent, JC, and within 1 minute. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Hong, please. Over to
Okay,
you.
so yet in terms of gender in natural resources management in general, not only in forest. So we see the importance of promoting gender in this activity, especially in the conservation too. So from the normal watching on the ground, we see women have a lot of knowledge about the herbal medicine, about the biodiversity. However, so in many projects, some common activities, they not emphasize the role of women in the sector. So based on different kind of models, project model in Vietnam, especially under the MRLG, LGR project, we promote the role of women in the customer tenure in forest management. and we see a lot of achievement. We get a lot of achievement, especially promote the equal roles in conservation, and also to help improve the effectiveness of the model of community forest management. That's a
Thank you
short
very
time.
Thank you very much, Hung, for that quick fire answer. We have another question that is being posed for Hong Tong. How about the government's recognition of forests attached to land? Is the process the same? So this is about, is there a different process for land tenure or for forest tenure? And again, please 1 minute and a response.
I still don't understand the question. Say again, can you clarify that?
The question seems to be, is there a different process for recognition of land tenure, which is not forest, or for forest tenure? What are the two different processes?
Very similar. It's slightly different with the land use planning and land recognition inside and outside the forest, because the only difference is that the inside has to take into consideration a lot the conservation of the biodiversity, because the inside forest there is different zones, management zone, for example, like total protection zones, control use zones, buffer zones, and also corridor. These zones has to be taken into consideration when you do the recognition of land, because the total protection zone cannot be allocated to the residential or agricultural land use. Back to you, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that is probably all of the time we have to respond to questions, but I would like to mention to the panelists that we will be continuing these conversations. You are more than welcome to get in touch with the panelists and myself to continue these very important conversations. And oops, sorry, that was the timer for Hong Kong. And we are very much looking forward to continuing this dialogue. There will be articles about this webinar online. So quickly, I would like to move on and hear just a final recommendation from each of our panelists in terms of how to improve customary tenure recognition in your country or even throughout the region. So please, I would like to start with Il.
Thank you so much. Two things I like to mention. Number one is for indigenous community that are now in the process of moving toward the final completion of ICLT registration. It's important that they move along this and try not to divide among themselves. And I call on for the NGO communities and government to take a joint effort to really explain to the indigenous people to really understand the importance of this tenure security for them for long-term social, cultural, and economic benefits for themselves. That at one level. Another level is for the indigenous community that have already secured the titles. For your information, the ADIC is now implementing a project called Horticulture and Market Linkage for supporting indigenous community that have already 20 indigenous community that have already received the title in the Northeast Cambodia, and we have now into the third years of supporting them to be able to benefit from that. So having the indigenous communal land titles alone may, to some extent, to a large extent, ensure the securities, but that's not sufficient. They need to gain benefit from investing or from producing anything on the land that they have. This is for how you say that, a holistic kind of integrated development for the community beyond land tenures alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Il. On that note, I would like to move on to Stony. Stony, please give one great recommendation for moving forward.
Actually, I have three, so I will go on to the three. So one is that recognize customary tenure, acknowledge it is the pre-existing rights of indigenous peoples and local community. The recognition is very important, not only for livelihoods, but it also for preservation of cultural identity, but it's also for environmental conservation, for climate change and mitigation of biodiversity conservation and all. And the second R is that realize, understand the complexity of customary tenure. Policy development initiative must account for the diversity of customary tenure practice. The legislative body should avoid a one-size-fits-all solutions and instead create policy that reflect the very natures of customary tenure. The last one is that reaffirm FPIC, ensure FPIC is conduct and obtain for any activities that impact the well-being of indigenous community. And also a proper FPIC process will enhance the effectiveness of project initiative and safeguard community interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we only have a few more minutes, so please, Hong Tong, if you could just give one recommendation. Thank you.
I think I agree with all. I mean, the recognition of customary land rights of the people is so critical, not just only to help improve the livelihoods of the people, but also to help maintain the forest. So everybody has to understand that, and it needs the political will to move forward, to strengthen the capacity of all the government, also all stakeholders to work together. And we also work with the other countries in the region in order to apply some best practice, for example, VGGT or RAI or other standards to apply in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hong, over to you.
Yes, we should admit the role of city in managing land and forest to combat climate change, conserve biodiversity, and address common global issues in the legal framework of each country. In this case, I suggest that from the Dazo's text message on the message box about the city ASEAN guidelines this should be issued in different countries, should apply comprehensive apply in each country in the region. That's all.
Thank you very much. JC, a final recommendation, quick fire round.
It's difficult to make a recommendation, but I think if government wants to be really serious with their sustainable forest management goal, I think we need to convince them that it's in their best interest to recognize customary tenure in the region.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that. That's a great note to end on. This has been such a wonderful discussion. We have so many things to discuss and so many things to say, so our time has been limited, but we really want to thank all of our panelists so much for joining us here. We are so appreciative of your participation, your engagement, and sharing your knowledge and your time. Also, a big thank you to all of our participants online. It's been great to see everyone so engaged in these important topics, especially in the question and answers and in the chat. I personally have so many reflections on what was said here today that it would be hard to sum up, but I think, if the goodwill is there, the collaboration can happen. And as Hong mentioned, we have something at the regional level that can hopefully support more recognition, which are these regional ASEAN customary tenure guidelines. Just a quick logistical note, please take the survey before you leave the webinar. We'd like to know what you thought and how we can improve. So please, click in the chat that is being sent by Land Portal, conduct the survey. And again, a huge thank you, and also a thank you to our interpreters for being with us today. And I'm sure we've really put them through the ringer in terms of all of their work, and we've had such rich discussions. So thank you to our interpreters as well. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful day, afternoon, evening, and I hope that this has really motivated all of you to engage more in customary tenure and to reach out to all of our panelists to discuss these issues in the future. We are all very open to hearing from you, and so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.